Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Mohammed Al-Qasim, and unlike most of the exciting people you meet at IAC, I'm not an astronaut, although I play one in the broken dreams of my parents. So our topic today is solving sustainability issues in Earth, in space, and beyond. I'm going to introduce the topic, then hand it over to our esteemed panelists. Okay, so on Earth, few examples of solving sustainability issues is that Earth observation and space is essential to solving the climate change issue and monitoring Earth vital signs. Also, space is vital to disaster recovery when it comes to connectivity, as well as also monitoring Earth, connecting the unconnected. So SATCOM connectivity, and we saw that during COVID, for example, provides crucial services like telemed and education. Also IoT enabler, for example, precision agriculture or even tracking of resources, all of that. In orbit, we have two examples. Debris removal allows for better utilization of satellite and allows also to put advanced satellites in orbit, and it allows for waste recycling. On orbit servicing, manufacturing, and refueling allows for longer endurance and also saving of resources. Lastly, is in space, for example, creation of closed loop technologies allows for less waste, preservance of resources. Those technologies to preserve resources in deep space also will impact the way we utilize resources on Earth. Also, the energy problem in Saudi, for example, we have this as an issue. So saving those problems in deep space applications will also have a tremendous impact on Earth. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Mshal Shmemri, to continue the discussion. So, Mshal, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. So, good morning, everyone. Today, we have our esteemed guest. Just to give you a little fun fact, amongst all of us, we have 156 years of experience in the space industry. So you have very experienced people on this topic. And today, we will be addressing solving sustainability issues on Earth, in space, and beyond, especially since now we're trying to do a lot more activities in space. So our impact in space is very critical to ensure sustainability, and we can learn from Earth to ensure sustainability in space. With that, I would like to introduce our guests. Next to me is Dr. Frans Wonderdonk. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I've been practicing. Director of Black Holes BV Consultancy and Professor of Space Law at the University of Nebraska. Next to him, we have Mr. Frank Salzgiber, Managing Director of the Space Sector at the Saudi Space Commission and former Head of Innovation and Venture Office at the European Space Agency. And then next to him is Dr. Candace Johnson, serial entrepreneur, founder and co-founder of SES, Chief Architect of SES Global, Chair of Seraphim Space, Vice Chair, Board of Directors of North Star Earth and Space, Inc. And then next to Ms. Candace is Val Munsami. He's the advisor to the Saudi Space Commission, co-founder of the African Space Leadership Institute, and the chancellor of the International Space University. And then last, next to Val is Dr. Soichi Noguchi. He is an astronaut and professor at University of Tokyo. So we have people with varying experiences within the aerospace industry. So the first set of questions I'm going to ask is on Earth, because in order for us to understand how to do things in space and beyond, we need to really solve our sustainability issues on Earth. So my first question goes to Candace. As a serial entrepreneur, having been doing new space for 40 years, what role do commercial entities play in solving sustainability issues on Earth?
So, Michal, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I want to congratulate the IAF on putting together an absolutely superb Congress and exhibition, and I want to thank the Saudi Space Commission for having put together this panel. I would also like to say that it gives me such great joy when we're talking about commercial opportunities and commercial players to see so many young entrepreneurs, all private, working in space and present here. So I like to, and by the way, I really added to the total years of experience. I like to describe my life in space as using satellites to provide first universal access. So when Mohammed was talking about connecting the unconnected, whether it was satellite television, satellite mobile, satellite internet, I have really been only doing privately financed, commercially oriented organizations to provide connectivity around the world. This has given me great joy, and I think it's helped a lot of people. But today, I actually also say that I'm using space and satellites going from giving universal access to accessing the universe. And so this, of course, includes all of the Earth observation, the weather, the agriculture, etc. And here again, we have some wonderful commercial operators, be it Digital Globe, be it Planet, be it Spire. And I've got a fun fact for you. In 1994, when I went and visited Landsat, the only thing that they were doing was looking for the Internal Revenue Service to see if people had pools, and they would then pay their taxes. So we have truly evolved from that. And finally, in my little 2 minutes here, I would like to make a plaidoyer. We have the entire world, not only who are not connected, but who maybe do not have access to space. So these are new countries, and they are the ones who need access to space to provide them with Earth observation, to help them know when the floods are coming, for their forests, etc. And so when we talk about sustainability, we really do, as the IAF says, we need to have space for all.
Thank you for that insight. So my next question goes to Franz, not Frank. Are there Earth sustainability laws you think will be essential to borrow from to ensure sustainability in space?
Well, I would have loved to say, as in Earth, do in outer space, but unfortunately there are two issues with that. First of all, the laws that are there on Earth are only at the very beginning of what we really need. I mean, the UN Framework Climate Change Convention is just that, just a starting point. And second of all, outer space is a totally different environment from Earth, so we really need the scientists' advice to understand to what extent what is dealt with by that convention and other sustainability rules being developed could apply, make sense in outer space. I mean, a greenhouse gas, what effect would that have in outer space? So I'm not so sure that currently we have that much to borrow from, although we have to defer to the scientists. The only thing I can say is that once we have an agreement on certain laws on Earth, there is this beautiful Article 3 in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which is often called the Magna Carta for outer space and certainly provides the general legal framework for all space activities. And this Article 3 allows us to borrow from any international legal treaty applicable to Earth if we think it makes sense for outer space as well. So once we come to an agreement that certain parts of the UN Framework Convention or further laws to be developed do make sense in outer space, we can certainly make that happen. So far, the only focus or the only aspect of sustainable use of outer space which we have really dealt with is typical for space, namely the space debris phenomenon, which is not something terrestrial. So I think I leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you so much. My next question goes to Sochi. As an astronaut who spent 344 days, 9 hours, and 33 minutes in space with limited resources, drinking purified urine, what lessons learned do you have that we can make use of on Earth to ensure our sustainability?
Hey, Michelle, thank you. I wish you didn't mention that purified urine, but anyway. Thanks, everyone, for gathering. And it's such a great honor to join this wonderful crew. Maybe you guys know that we are not just a pickup crew. We are all working for the Saudi Space Commission and to make Saudi Arabia #1 player in this industry. And so we are like an old friend now. And obviously, Candice is like a commander. And trust me, I have a good experience working under female commander. This group will be a great team. Back to the question. Today, we're going to talk a lot about limiting resources and also how to make our society sustainable. And the water, yes, we use urine. And I can go back to limited resource. Water is definitely a very limited resource on board the International Space Station. So we collect the urine. Also, we collect all the water in the atmosphere as well, and then purified, boiled, and then we reuse it. So if now you're drinking water, that's a good example. We are drinking somebody's water yesterday. So today's coffee becomes somebody's coffee tomorrow. And but again, it's totally purified, totally clean, and I have no concern drinking the water on the space station. But the thing is, the necessity is the mother of innovation. When I first fly to space 17 years ago, that was a space shuttle. Space shuttle uses the fuel cell, which means the byproduct is water. So we have lots of water. We have some shuttle astronaut in the audience as well, but he knows that we are just dumping water out because there's too much water. So we did not recycle any water at all. Now the space station, we are using the solar panel. So there's no fuel cell. So the water, if you dump water outboard, we have to bring it from the ground. It takes a lot of money. So we come up with the technology and collecting water, heating up, boiling, purifying, and then we can use the water again. So this is one of the examples that once you realize the importance of the certain resources, we come up with a new technology and make our society sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I heard that the E-Class system could be used in remote areas that do not have access to clean water. And that's so technologies that are developed for space applications have direct applicability for Earth. And that's how innovation moves forward with the need, as you mentioned earlier.
That's right, yeah. And my first visit to Saudi Arabia was like 10 years ago, and I visited lots of universities, and I was really impressed that they have a lot of good technology to purifying water because their resources are very limited, and they try to convert the salty water into the drinkable, potable water. So that's another good example that if you have a necessity, there will be a technology to answer.
Thank you so much. And my next question goes to Val. In your experience developing national strategies and policies, what are key strategies you have used on Earth that you find have a direct application to sustainability in space?
Good morning, colleagues, and thanks, Michelle, for rallying the troops together. Really glad to be here. I'm going to keep it on a policy track. So if you look at it from a governance perspective, any effective government, that it's worth its salt, has to focus on 2 or 3 key priorities: economic growth, the social welfare of its citizens, and the sustainability issue. And we normally, from a policy perspective, talk about space as ancillary. It's not mainstream for government policy, in a sense that if you want to address education, energy, food security, you bring space technology and solutions from that domain to help you in the other policy domains, or the mainstream policy domains. So from a sustainability perspective on Earth, we draw from space sector to produce solutions, products and services like Earth observation, PNT, telecommunications, and so on. And we also use this kind of information for what we call evidence-based policy making. So you have a long stream of data, and you use that to make sense of what's going on historically, and you project forward. And so there's a solution set that's evolving over time that's looking at the sustainability issues here on Earth. Now, if you go back to the Apollo missions, to land on the moon and come back, there's a whole set of technologies that you have to develop from scratch. And as a consequence, you had a lot of spin outs to other active sectors of the economy. But what we are going to find here is that there are solution sets that we've adopted and developed to address our sustainability issues here on Earth that we can spin into the space sector. And I think that's going to be a major perspective. And I think another sort of factor that gives momentum to this is the number of commercial enterprises. I mean, in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, you've seen like over 10,000 new enterprises globally just suddenly mushrooming. And all of that, if you look at it from a global space sector point of view, the number of solutions that are being provided on the table is just expanding exponentially. So I think the potential that we can draw from what we've developed for addressing policy issues here on Earth is going to be useful in terms of how we address sustainability issues on other planetary surfaces like Moon and Mars. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Frank, what is the biggest threat you see to human sustainability on Earth, and how do you propose we solve it?
The breakthrough, and we had it before, that the technology is driven by the demand. And the breakthrough we will always have is the human being. So the space we have ourselves in our head. And this is how much we allow for open technology, how much we are allowed to adapt. And we heard about tech transfer often. Most of the time, and as a head of tech transfer for over a decade, the limitation was the human. And I think this is the biggest hurdle what we have. Because most of the tech transfer we got our project were not offline. So we were the Hermes glider and other projects, and the engineers were forced to do something with the technology. So the technology transfer and the solution was already there, but I would say the people were too blind to see. And this is when we speak about technology transfer and all this stuff becomes only sustainable when you put it from the beginning in. And we all learned in the first semester, the professor said, you put your brain into the discussion and into the solving problem in the beginning, and then you deploy it into a demo and so on. Today, and many times we see that in our life, they start to plot the first sketches and later, oh, it doesn't working, and then you try to fix it. So, and this is also in our entire system. Look to the car manufacturing. We do not see that there is a problem with the quality, and I would say we qualify or continue to produce rubbish, make it better. At the end, we see that it's wrong. So I think it's the setup. It is our setup, how we see sustainability, how we see technology. The limitation factor is the human, and the limitation factor is the timing. Yeah, having something done in 2 quarters, it's tough. Or it's easy from the other side. It's tough to have impact. It's easy to be done. If we want to have impact, let's think about not one time span of a life. What happens to your business and our projects, and there we're back to space, when we think in the lifetimes of 3 humans or 10 humans? Because everybody knows who has maybe, like we in my family, a forest. When you want to build a forest and you plant the first tree, you don't do it for yourself. Not even for your kid. You do it for your grandkid. Yeah, because then you do the harvesting. So I think the limitation what we have with our project is the ambitions and our mind, which limits ourselves. And the thing, this is we have to think bigger and allow our minds and our engineers and our visionaries to think much bigger, because only then we can solve it.
Thank you so much. So essentially, we should be thinking very long term. And I've always said my motto for engineering is test early and test often, so you don't arrive at a failed system later on. Thank you so much for that insight. So now I'm going to transport us from Earth to space. My question goes to Candace. With over 128 million pieces of space debris 1 millimeter in size, 500,000 around 1 centimeter in size, and 23,000 of several companies attempting to tackle this problem, but I have yet to see an in-space demo.
Wait, let me see. 8 months, and the company where I'm the vice chair, North Star, will indeed be doing that. Actually, we may even be doing it sooner, but I'll let that be a surprise. So, you know, when the chair of North Star called me and asked me if I could meet him on a Sunday in Paris, and by the way, he and I were both members of the board of Iris Capital, so a venture capital fund, and very used to looking at ventures, you know, that make money. And he said, Candice, you know, could you meet me? I want to talk with you about a new company. So I went and met him. And, you know, as I said, I've done satellite television, satellite telecommunications, satellite mobile, satellite internet. I've even, you know, put together the first ILS, International Launch Services, between Khrushchev and Lockheed, of which I'm still very, very proud of and hope that we can get back to that cooperation in space and peace. But when he talked to me about doing space situational awareness with North Star and space domain awareness and space traffic management, I said, whoa, this was 5 years ago. This is something new. It is very important. And when you're an entrepreneur, you have to make decisions that are critical for you. And so for me, I said, whoa, I can make an impact here. I can help make certain that space remains the most valuable resource for us. Now, why do I say the most valuable resource for us? Because today, with the digital transformation, with the Internet of Things, with sensors all over, be they on people, be they in oceans, be they on the forests, agriculture, etc. We need to be able to collect all of this information and then bring it down for insights. So truly, we are dependent on space. And these new tools that will be coming, you know, allowing us to have a 360-degree view of near space, and then hopefully, you know, to this lunar and then beyond. These will make certain that we have an arena to work in, a safe, a secure, and I hope a very peaceful arena. So this is the promise of space situational awareness, space domain awareness, and space traffic management. And we all must make certain, and Val, you know, you've been setting policy, but as a private operator or, you know, whatever, for instance, I have always espoused, I was the first president, founding president of the Association of Private Telecom Operators. And so we put in codes of conduct. We wrote white papers. This is what we need to do. So I would please ask that all of us be responsible players in space, on Earth, and for the universe.
Thank you so much. Sochi, based on your experience, what is the most critical resource in space that is at threat given our growing efforts in space?
All right, based on my experience, what's the most limited resource? Okay, well, we talked about water. Water is definitely a limited resource. Oxygen is also a very limited resource. And as far as our crew concerned on the space station, ice cream was a limiting resource. Everyone, as far as ice cream is concerned, everyone is demanding an equal share. But, you know, give a little bit of a twist. I would say the limiting resource currently on board is the CO2 removal capability. It's different from the ground issue because we have a carbon neutral, you know, reducing the CO2. On board, the astronauts live, breathe air, and produce CO2. And somehow we have to scrub CO2. And back in the days, again, the old story, the space shuttle uses the one-way use CO2 scrubbing machine. That's a LiO. That's a lithium hydroxide, and it's cheap and it's pretty effective. Even in the current, the SpaceX Crew Dragon used the LiO canister, but that's one-time use. So if you want to make the space station sustainable, we have to use some regenerative way. And then we have those carbon dioxide removal assembly, and we are scrubbing. But obviously the number keep growing. The astronauts now currently living 7. By the way, tomorrow there's 3 more adding. The Soyuz 60S we're gonna launch tomorrow. But anyway, so CO2 scrubbing capability is actually the limiting factor. And of course, on the ground, we are working on the carbon neutral. And one of the way is the CO2 plus water becomes methane. And then we are using the same mechanism called Sabatier. And NASA, along with ESA as well, and they're working with this device. And I cannot say this is 100% effective yet, because we're still in the developing phase. So if you can make a methane out of a CO2, and again, then we can use the water and then produce the hydrogen and produce methane, that's good, but we are still on the way. So we have to be more effective, more serious about the CO2 removing capability.
So if I may, Sochi, you are destroying a myth, because my dad worked on Apollo mission for President Kennedy,
right.
And he would bring home freeze-dried ice cream. Mm-hmm. And so we thought that all astronauts had ice cream. So
Candice, I know you're picking on the Apollo astronaut anyway, but yeah, I know how to say. The freeze-dried ice cream is not the real thing. That's
no,
like
even we thought
back
that
in
was
old
the
days.
case.
Your father eating the freeze-dried, tasteless ice cream. We have a real ice cream. So we have our own refrigerator, and we have a Bluebell. Maybe American knows, but the real ice cream. So that's the very limiting resource, because every time we have a new cargo ship coming up, we have a very limited portion for astronaut can use, and we put every single inches for ice cream.
That's awesome. I'm going to need ice cream after this. Franz, I have a question for you that you may not like, but I'm going to ask anyways. Many say, including myself, that space law is fragmented and dated. How can it be more cohesive and updated given the many players in space and many emerging ones? What are space laws that new space players should have from the start?
Well, those are the $1 billion questions, right? And you only give me 2 minutes to answer them?
Yes.
Okay, I will do my best. First, by way of a starter, it's probably not as fragmented as many people think, because at least there is a bunch of treaties which provides the general framework. I made reference to the Outer Space Treaty already, which is the key one in this regard. And so far, in many respects, it has withstood the test of time, partly because it's flexible and open. But yes, it's dated. For obvious reasons, these treaties dated back to the 60s and 70s. And for example, if you talk about the subject of today, no one in the world, I almost dare say, had any idea about what sustainability would be as an issue. Not even the environment was high on the agenda. So in that sense, the Outer Space Treaty and the follow-up treaties do not give us much of a clue on how to specifically address these issues. So yes, it's dated. And the next question is, how can it be more cohesive and updated? Well, in theory, as a law professor, I would say the ideal is, of course, create another treaty. Not do away with the Outer Space Treaty, because you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. And it has done some terribly good things. It is still very relevant today, but you could amend it or add treaties specifically on sustainability. Apart from what I said before, that we then need to know what exactly to regulate, the problem is that in today's geopolitical climate, the likelihood even of just the 4 or 5 leading space powers of agreeing on essential elements to go ahead is not as large as it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. So that's more a political problem than a legal problem. Having said that, if we talk about sustainability, and in particular if we talk about the next 3 or 4 generations, humanity is all in the same boat. So there is, underneath all the political factoring and fighting even perhaps, there is this common idea that if we want to save the planet, if we want to save humanity, we should at some point come together. So I'm not totally without hope. The current day and age, we can't move to that treaty idea. That's simply too far, politically speaking. But what we can do, and that's what you actually see happening, is on the one hand, develop these guidelines, long-term sustainability guidelines as they are developed in COPWAS, which at least put a point on the horizon to strive to. That may not be law yet, but it may become law if more and more countries start to realize how important it is, even for the time being voluntarily, to comply with them. And the other side to that is the way nations can, within their own jurisdiction, within their own power, propose laws and regulations which already work towards that end. And you see that happening. We've by now more than 24 countries in the world which have a national space law, which require the private sector to get a license. And increasingly you see that as part of the licensing process, these questions of sustainability come up. And some of the latest laws actually make reference to that. Now, that doesn't take away the risk of fragmentation altogether, because every country, of course, has its own ideas, its own idiosyncrasies. But at the same time, they are looking to each other. They are learning from each other. So there may be, for the time being, that may be the most feasible approach.
Thank you. So one of the critical ingredients is to have collaboration between countries to agree on, but essentially they have to do it in their countries first, and then try to come together and collaboratively agree.
I wouldn't say first. It's two tracks which can run parallel. But it's very important because on a national level, of course, countries, being sovereign, have the legal power to actually make things stick and to enforce things. That power you don't have at the international level. At the same time, as you say, cooperation is crucial to make sure that other countries are doing the same. And maybe in an ideal world, 10 years from now, all countries are doing this on a binding level.
Thank you. Frank, you always say we need more space. How much space do you plan to use, and how can you ensure that our activities do not disrupt the space environment? And what are ways we can minimize our impact but still achieve our objectives in space? Because a clear example is space debris.
Very good question, nasty question, no, just kidding. So we need more space, and I go back to my new hometown, Riyadh. Riyadh will grow from 7.5 million to 15 to 20 million by 2030, so it's less than a decade. So there's demand of more space, so no more space technology. So it depends how you develop the technology. The demand, as we said, drives the technology. And we want more space when we're looking to how we develop certain things, when we're looking to space debris. We have the first company thinking about, okay, can we not recycle all the upper stages we have in orbit? So I believe the business model which we have behind these technologies, demands, is super important, because you have to calculate always full costs, because somebody will have pay. Either the environment, the general public, or the private industry. And I think this is the marketplace which we have to enable, to allow that we use these technologies, use demand markets to grow together. And I gave the best example, so maybe we need a kind of eBay platform where you do an exchange. How you will change the gas, the fuel, the recycling of water in lower Earth orbit. This goes back to what Franz says. So maybe the industry has to find up and bring the platform where you exchange it. And there will be junkyard dealers maybe in outer orbit. And you start with the recycling right away, because it will be cheaper to use aluminium which is flying around than to bring it up with a launcher. So and building this economy, and make it, as Ken is always saying, make it commercial from the beginning. Because the commercial market maybe is brutal, but it will regulate. So this is, I think, what I would envision to make it sustainable, because then you cannot even afford to have space debris, because somebody would say, if you heard me, this is, I think, the state of Texas did. If something falls down and the cow is hurted, you have to pay the cow. So this is, again, legislation. So better to use your space debris and sell it to somebody who can recycle it. So I think this is when we think about a supply chain which is going to a circular economy, There in space, we have the chance to do it right this time. But it should be driven by the market, by the industry, by commercial. And then we avoid the problems which we have with CO2 emissions, because somebody has to pay. Humanity will pay. It's not priced. So, but I think this is what we have to do in lower Earth orbit, on the moon, and Mars and beyond.
That's great. I think recycling should start immediately.
And if I may, now I would not only talk about recycling, Frank, I would talk about repurposing. Repurposing, because there are so many vehicles, satellites, GEO, the International Space Station itself, that are up there. And we can give them literally second lives with these new technologies.
And it starts with the design. Look to this bottle. It's designed to be repurposed. That's smart. So, and this is how it should be. So when we go into engineering again, design it that you have a second, third, and fourth life. Then you really have a profit and a benefit. So, and therefore, recycling means repurposing, definitely, in all different fields.
Absolutely. So, in space, my last question is for Val. You have been an advocate for small or emerging space players globally. What do you consider the most important strategy a country should implement to enable it to become a top space player? And how can sustainability fit into this equation?
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to latch on to how do you become a top space player and still stay committed to sustainability issues. And by the way, what Candice and Frank were talking about is we talk about the circular economy, essentially what they've just described. Okay. It's interesting because we just came out of a IAF global conference on space for emerging countries, which was very successful in Quito, Ecuador. The theme of the conference was building space ecosystems. And that is the key of unlocking the potential at a national level in terms of if you want to become a top space player, is that sustainability issue is driven by an ecosystem. Now, I also want to throw some caution to the wind. I'm observing some trends globally. There are many countries that suddenly wake up and say, we need to be a spacefaring country. They send a few engineers across the ocean, you build a one new CubeSat, you have it launched, and we are now a spacefaring country. That is so far from the truth. There's nothing sustainable. You don't have a space ecosystem. And in fact, I think it might even be irresponsible, because if we ask what is the utility of those CubeSats, it's little or no value. Actually, you might be adding to the space junk. The more sort of sustainable approach is actually looking at an ecosystem approach. How do I build the human capital? How do I get the infrastructure on the ground? How do I stimulate the industry? How do I bring academia online? How do I bring the investment houses into play? That is the ecosystem approach. And the utility and the value proposition is actually in the downstream. I could a country can build a $500 million satellite. If it does not deliver on the products and services it was intended for, the value is actually zero of the satellite. It's not $500 million, okay? So the actual potential or the value proposition is on the downstream. And so what developing countries should be looking at to become a top space player is looking at the impact of those products and services on the downstream. And that is currently being shaped at the moment. If you look at the digital space and the advances being made there, and AI and big data analytics, is how do we pull that into the space domain in terms of driving those products and services. And I think that's essentially, from a developing country's perspective, that's the core focus in terms of downstream application, addressing socio-economic, environmental issues.
And if I may, when His Excellency, the chairman of the Saudi Space Commission, asked me what I thought was Saudi's greatest asset, I absolutely said his youth. And this is so important. I also say it starts with space, it never ends with space.
Yeah, with 74% of our population under the age of 40, absolutely. Yeah. We can capitalize on that.
I just wanted to add, Frank and I were brought into the commission to drive a space ecosystem approach. And Franz, Candice, and Soichu are keeping us on the straight and narrow. But the point is, if you have big ambitions, you have to drive a space ecosystem.
Thank you. So now we will move on to beyond, meaning Moon and Mars. My first question, it goes to Candace. Many of the companies that you have invested in alone or with Seraphim, and also where you are on the board, have dedicated satellite constellations to solving issues of climate change. To be proactive in our activities on the Moon and Mars, what role do you see commercial space playing in preserving or reducing the impact of our activities on the lunar and Martian environment?
So, as chair of the Seraphim Space Advisory Board, it is very important. So we make money, right? We invest money, and we have to give a return on our investment. And we have done very well. We're the largest space tech venture fund in the world. We had an IRR of 49%. On our first fund, we have a growth fund, and we're starting our third fund. So in June, I brought everybody together, and I said, all right, what do we now need to invest in? And that is going to bring a return in 7 years. So a little bit, usually venture capitals are 5 years, but being space, we're 7 years. And so we came up with this really, not very innovative approach, but it was revolutionary for a venture capitalist, and that was we would invest today in space in space. So we will, and we are, investing in space stations. We are investing in in-orbit services. We are investing in habitats that will be used on Mars and the Moon, and but also on Earth. And so I like to, as we go forward, and particularly with the findings of the James Webb, which I think inspired the entire world, I like to think of it this way. So we have deep space, we have near space, and we have the planet Earth. And this is actually just one space. And we must start thinking about this. And then, in order to make certain that we continue to be sustainable, also from a venture capitalist point of view, I am envisaging what I call networks for the universe. These may be traffic networks. They may be communication networks. Because when we are on Mars, when we are on the Moon, we need to make certain that we have resilient communications. We need to make certain that the transportation to these places is safe. And so networks for the universe, I think, is a guiding principle that we as venture capitalists will be investing in and working with the other members of the ecosystem.
Thank you. Val, let me paint a scenario for you. Country X installs its base near an area on the Moon that has high density of ice below the lunar regolith, with no one being able to acquire a specific location on a celestial body per the Outer Space Treaty. Do you believe if Country Y attempts to reach this exact location, it could start a space war? And how can that be sustainable?
Thanks, Michelle, for that heavy question. It actually is underscoring a very messy situation that we have at the moment. And just to explain that, if you look at the Outer Space Treaty, it says it's the province of all mankind. So we all have access to outer space. If you look at the Moon Treaty, it says it's a common heritage of all humankind. And that's where the problem comes. You move from the province of all mankind to the common heritage of all humankind. Common heritage means that if I go and appropriate resources, let's say from the lunar surface, it means it belongs to everybody, not to me or the nation that extracted it. And that is what's making the Moon Treaty contentious at the moment. There's only 18 countries that have signed off to the Moon Agreement, and none of them have moon missions, by the way. And there's more countries that have signed up to the Artemis Accord, by the way. And so, I mean, even in the conversation we were having, I think, in this very same room yesterday, we were talking about confliction and deconfliction, and how do we deal with that. Now, I just want to draw on maybe my own experience in terms of heading up an agency. You have a whole pipeline of missions, okay? And if you're looking at how do you drive efficiencies and impact in an organization, very often agency says it's mission-driven, values-led. Mission-driven, values-led. The mission is a core focus. We'll set us a set of values in terms of how we expect things, people to behave to make the mission happen. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's values-driven, mission-led. You define a set of values in terms of how the organization will behave, and then you get the missions done. Okay? And that's very critical in terms of organizational culture. I think the same applies to some of the treaties. I mean, we're talking about the Artemis Accord. We probably need a more principled approach, guiding principles and so on. And I think what's at the core globally at the moment is the geopolitical tension. If we can take a more values-driven approach, we're going to start to cut through that. And any tension in space, by the way, is only heightened by tensions on Earth, the geopolitical differences that we have. To resolve the issues in space, you've got to resolve your differences here on Earth, unfortunately. So let me leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. As we're running low on time, I wanted to surprise you with one question, but you must be very concise, as I'm asking you to tell me in 3 words, how can we solve sustainability on Earth, in space, and beyond? Good luck. Only 3 words. I will not accept any longer sentences. Frank.
Prices, make it commercial, make a business out of it, and let the people pay. Sorry for words.
That's more than 3 words. Franz?
Get the lawyers on board from the beginning. And I know that's more than 3 words, but try to sue me for that.
I'll be calling you later. Candace?
Vision, believe, act.
Thank you. That was really on spot. Val?
It's values, collective, values, togetherness, and innovation.
Thank you. Dr. Sochi?
I would like to keep it simple, but I would say how do I say? It's the resources are limited.
Very true. Thank you so much. And now I would like to open it up for questions from the audience.
No question, no lunch, huh? That's the deal.
I'm sure many of you have some questions. Over there.
Good morning. My question is, with which acts in concrete do you think that the sustainability programs can come to the emerging countries?
Did you want anyone specifically to tackle that question?
I think that Val has done a specialization in that.
Can you just repeat that question, Pilar?
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Which acts and concrete activities do you think that the sustainability programs can come to our emerging countries? What is the proposal of the PAN?
Okay, I'm hoping I understand your question.
While you're hoping.
and of course, I want to listen to Candace Johnson because I know that you are very concrete.
Very quickly, because I foresaw this question. And, you know, I very much believe that emerging countries do have so much to gain from space. 40 years ago, 1983, Luxembourg was having three crises, a steel crisis, a broadcasting crisis, and a monetary union crisis with Belgium. The prime minister was looking for a new fourth economic pillar. I told him, Mr. Werner, your little country of 400,000 people can do space. Today, this SES satellite is Luxembourg's largest taxpayer, and it is the #1 satellite system in the world. So, you know, emerging country, and I tell this to every single emerging country, it starts with space, it doesn't end with space, but you can do it. We had nobody who knew how to do space when we started. Today, everybody does space in Luxembourg.
So let me come in now. So if you look at a point of view from, you're on the starting block, okay? So everybody's aspiring to Moon and Mars. What developing countries need is to focus on addressing that socio-economic climate back home, okay? And so you bring to the table products and solutions to address the sustainability issue. And I think what's also quite important that is, as developing countries, and I need to set up these institutions, unlike the older, bigger agencies who have legacy systems and issues, the flexibility is not there. Whereas with developing countries with smaller and more agile, you could start to move very much more quickly compared to the bigger agencies. And I think that is a plus that we need to leverage on. So while we're all aspiring there, we could essentially help to fix the problems here on Earth. And I think some of those learnings can then be drawn into the bolder aspirations in terms of space exploration.
Thank you. We can take one question, but we basically have 50 seconds to answer it. Oh, sorry, minus 50. We're actually out of time. So thank you so much for being here. We hope you learned a lot from the 156 years of experience. Thank you so much.
Applause for Michal. She's an amazing entrepreneur and space person.
Thank you so much.